is, or if you know someone who is, this hour will be worth the listening. Now, let's tune in to today's edition of Caregiver Reality with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato.
Good evening, South Florida, America, and the world. This is the Caregiver Reality Hour, and I'm your host, David Levy, and my co-host, Paul Vadiato. Good evening, Paul.
Good evening, David.
All right. We stepped on one another there. Anyway, this is the Caregiver Reality Show. You can see us on caregiverreality.com, live show, AMP2 TV. You can hear us anywhere in the country on iHeartRadio. Click on Florida and go down to WNN. Or you're listening to us now, hopefully in drive time, on WWNN 1470 AM. If you've got a question for us, 1-800-565-1470, or you can send it to Paul at caregiverreality.com or David at caregiverreality.com, and we will respond back to you. We've been getting a number of emails and responses on the website. We're very pleased to see that, and we have been getting into some very interesting issues as a result of that. Paul, as always, how was your week in caregiving?
Wow. You know, as you say, David, caregiving is in 30, 60, and 90-day buckets before things go upside down.
Right.
And this has been a week of some visits of old friends and new friends in the world of unexpected illnesses that came up. But you know what it really did bring home was that reminder that as a caregiver, one of the prime responsibilities that we have is really to be an advocate. And specifically, I'm talking about, we went to a lot of specialists in the last few days, and you know we had a lot of medical tests done.
Right.
But as an advocate, you also need to know when to say no. Because if things sometimes are not as necessary as you might think them to be, for example, there was an invasive test that was recommended, sometimes as the advocate you have to make a decision and say no. And had that experience this week, and now towards the end of the week we're starting to see a little bit calming down and things starting to get under control.
Well, and certainly, you know, from a few weeks back, that whole story about my uncle and the intensivist in the ICU.
Yes.
And I had to say no. Honor his written directives and stop trying to put a Band-Aid, you know, on a hemorrhage. And so I recognize and understand completely it's one of the things that as Caregiver Reality and also as the Family Caregiver Advocacy Group, advocacy is really, you know, our middle name, because if you can't be an effective spokesperson, and I've been reading, and we're going to be having her on the show in the not-too-distant future, but I've been reading Vicki Kind's book on compassion.
As have I.
Right. And she talks about substituted judgment and what it takes. She's a bioethicist, and so this is a particular concern as to how you step in and effectively represent another when you truly know how they feel, or when you're following their directives, which is substituted judgment or substituted surrogate, or if you have no idea what is the best alternative, or, you know, what is best practices, for lack of a better way to say it.
Yes, and hopefully she'll join us in the near term on our show to speak about some of these important bioethical issues.
Right, and it's not a lot of psychobabble for the audience out there. This is real, practical underpinning from a bioethical perspective, both from a medical and an ethical perspective, on how you, as your loved one's surrogate, or the one speaking on their behalf, how you make some of those evaluations as, do you know them well enough? It may be mom, but do you truly know what her directives want? And what was her real thinking? And do you really have the right kind of to call an audible at the last minute and impose your own will on somebody who has clearly expressed it at a prior time when they're fully able to do it?
Comes down to, am I doing the right thing?
Right. And so going forward, you know, these are issues that we have to be very aware of, because we're taking a very important responsibility. Caregiving just isn't bedpan patrol. It has a lot more to do with exactly what you were talking about, Paul. It's being there to be kind of the overseer. And in a support group I was doing very recently, I made the point, I make it over and over again, that if your loved one goes to the hospital, for argument's sake, and they come back to a facility, they even come back home, you need to double check and triple check what medicines they came home with, because they get changed all the time. What you're left with and what you come back with, and that's especially important if your loved one's in a facility. And so I make sure that everybody that I come in contact with, and I say it to the audience, make sure that if you're responsible for a loved one who is in a facility, that you put in their chart, if there is any change whatsoever in their medication, whether it's dosage, frequency, strength, product, whatever it may be, you are to be notified. You need to know. Even if you don't understand all the implications of it, you need to know so that you can question others, whether it's the doctor or the prescribing physician from the hospital. Why they change it? Why are they doing what they're doing?
And you need to have it with you, because you know, if the ambulance comes, that's the time you're going to want to have it.
Well, that's the sheet that says, what am I on when I'm going in? I'm talking about when you've been discharged, and you're back home.
Okay.
What did you come back with that you didn't leave with, or what got changed while you were there? And that's real important. Mm-hmm. And I learned that very carefully with Suzette.
And how is she doing, speaking of caregiving?
Speaking of caregiving, she's doing much better. In spite of her own self-analysis, she's doing great on the knee. You saw her the other day when we were meeting at the house, and she's really getting around tremendously well. I mean, we jumped right over the walker, as I've said. She never really used the cane. Her balance is so much better. Mm-hmm. So I'm terribly pleased. Now we got to wean her away from being home and get her out there and build up some stamina and get her back in the real world. And so while my 3 dogs, love them, 2 dachshunds, a bloodhound, and soon to be returned, my teddy bear Pomeranian, who's been living at my daughter-in-law's house because it was too much to handle with Suzette in the hospital and the nursing home, but whose name is Mac Jagger, by the way, and he'll be coming back to us very soon in his own inimitable style. So we're looking forward to that. Remember, folks, you're listening to the Caregiver Reality Hour. Caregiver Reality is all about you, the caregiver, the person taking care of another who can no longer take care of themselves, or in many cases, never could. When you listen to that piece in the front of the show, and it talks about if you're taking care of an older person, a parent, or even a spouse, but we can't forget all the people that are caregiving for children, for people under 20, special needs children. And so caregiving really doesn't care how old you are or how old the person that you're dealing with. I've seen a lot of children, and when I say children, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, who, like it or not, have been adopted into the caregiving cause because a brother or sister, a mother or father are unable to do for themselves. And the stress and strain on kids is even greater because they're trying also to grow and be a normal part of the world, and we kind of at times stunt that a little bit because, like it or not, they become de facto caregivers. And we need to think about that anytime that we have caregiving going on at home. Well, everybody's affected, including the family dog. So
that's true.
It's true. I mean, your attitude and the way you respond, anybody that has a pet knows that. If you're having a bad day, they'll have a bad day, even though they'll do their best to cheer you up. But you have to be conscious of everything around you when you have the responsibility of being a caregiver. Anyway, Paul, last week you went away to Texas. All right. Why don't you tell us a little bit about all your exes that live in Texas?
Well, I tell you, I was very blessed and fortunate to visit with the good people at Origins Recovery Center in South Padre Island, and they run a men's and a women's separate units that deal with recovery over a 90-day period, followed by a transitions period after they've gone through recovery.
Now, when you talk about recovery, you're talking about substance abuse?
Substance abuse, along with, in most cases, mental health issues as well, such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And
that compound the issue with the addiction.
Oh, it just makes it worse.
They don't take folks in that, let's say, are just bipolar. And okay, so it's a mental condition mixed in with an addictive personality and a substance abuse.
Let's broaden the word addiction to include things like gambling, sex addiction, shopping addiction. Chemical dependency, though, is by and large the ones that they solve and work with most of the time.
Would you say it's more pills and powder or alcohol?
You know, it's a mix of both. Alcohol is certainly a huge issue, but believe it or not, heroin is making a huge comeback. It's come down so much in price that more and more people are finding it as the drug of choice. But they do a couple of very unique things that I was privileged to be part of. And I know I'm going to mispronounce this, David, so you'll help me out, I'm sure. Psychoneuroplasticity.
You said it right.
Is one of the strategies that they use and one of the mechanisms that actually help reprogram the brain, where they're able to take some of the negativity that some of their clients have and reprogram them into the part of the brain that is more pleasure and
that are more positive.
More positive in that structure.
Right. It's a form of cognitive, you know, which is our capacity inside of our brain to do many things. Cognitive retraining to get out of negative behavior and try and emphasize positive behavior.
Yes. And the other thing that they're doing that is proprietary to them is an after care program that they call the MAP program, M-A-P. And it's a 15-month post-discharge recovery support system, and it facilitates the complex transition that occurs from treatment to the new life after they've embraced their recovery. And Origins is very much steeped into traditional 12-step big book recovery.
Right. 12-step is a very difficult problem to deal with.
I understand.
All right, but I want to let you know that addiction is something that Paul and I have been focusing on since he's joined me. He brings a wealth of knowledge from his, as he calls it, his prior lifetimes. You know, when we say 25 years, they were speaking only of my particular interests in caregiving over the last 25, 26 years, but Paul has been involved in this for an equal amount of time, so that, but from a different perspective, as well as education. So if we added it all up, we're probably somewhere around your age, 72, 73.
Thank you, David.
Right.
But if I may share one thing that I thought was very significant. During the day, we met with various staff members, and there was a part of the day that we were addressing the clinicians, the therapists that actually work with
hands-on people.
The hands-on people. And there was a group of maybe 14, 15 of them, ranging from their 20s into their 50s. And one of the requirements that Origins have is they want people who themselves have gone through recovery and they're familiar with it.
I think that's a phenomenal idea.
It is. And I began when I was introduced, I began by saying, "Hello, my name is Paul, and I am a caregiver."
Oh, wow.
And it got a lot of attention right away. And I asked the question that I think we rather surprised them. I said, how many of you are currently caregivers or see yourselves becoming caregivers in the near future? And I'm going to say between 25% to 1/3 of them had their hand up, and they sort of looked around at one another.
And were a little surprised.
They were surprised at the numbers. But when I spoke about it being not only a clinical issue, which they understand every which way,
right,
But that blue line that you speak about, David, from the non-clinical perspective of dealing with the stress, dealing with the coping skills, the decision-making ability.
The practical problem solving.
The practical problem solving. And it was almost as if that light went on and they saw exactly what we were talking about. So I think this is going to be an important relationship that we're going to want to maintain. And I think for those that are battling these issues within their family and they would like to have some information on them or on the work that we're doing as it applies to addictions and family caregiving, certainly get in touch with us at the addresses that you gave earlier.
Paul at caregiverreality.com or David at caregiverreality.com. And you're listening to us on WWNN 1470 AM locally in our South Florida backyard, on caregiverreality.com, on AMP2, and on iHeartRadio. So wherever you are, we're pleased to have you with us, but there's no excuse not to listen because we cover the four corners thanks to Freddie. And so it sounds like your trip was very beneficial. You had an opportunity to speak with people that didn't understand or possibly hadn't been introduced to the non-clinical family caregiving aspect of the family dynamic. And
it is. And to reiterate a point that you have made so many times, addiction is a disease, and all diseases have caregivers. And since caregiving is a role and not a disease, the work involving caregiving is non-clinical. And it's the clinicians who, in many cases, come to us to help them deal with the issues in their life. And I had those kind of conversations with a couple of the clinicians while I was there because they're struggling either with parent issues or with spousal caregiving issues.
I can understand that, and you know, we make fun of it a little bit, but nobody ever came down in terms of clinical with a bad case of caregiveritis. I mean, you may have a tough time as a caregiver, but it isn't because you caught a disease. And so that's why we stay on the non-clinical side when we deal with caregivers. You know, one of our relationships that we're growing out is with Medical Research Charities, which is an umbrella organization for many organizations that do research in various clinical aspects of things, cancer, stroke, what have you. And I thought I would just touch base on one of their subsidiary not subsidiary, but one of the organizations that's underneath their umbrella. And you can read more about it always at medicalresearchcharities.org. But the Alzheimer's Research Center of America, which is Scripps Research Institute, and that's the one out in La Jolla, California. And the Alzheimer's Research Center of America scientists are working tirelessly to find new treatments and therapies to fight Alzheimer's disease. Scientists conduct basic research through interdisciplinary, where they are all sharing and promoting one another, combining techniques of genetics, molecular biology, cell biology, imaging, neurophysiology, neuroanatomy, what is the brain constructed like, as well as behavioral issues. And the discoveries that come from this interdisciplinary research are translated into new medicines and therapies through drug discoveries. So this is really, they're the petri dish that drug concepts are kind of grown in, and then under this new concept that came out with Obama of having research and drug companies share information so that they can try out and get more drugs to market quicker or pass around new ideas or data in a faster way, this is emblematic and of exactly what's going on. So they're dealing with a lot of therapies for cognitive, including impairments associated with aging, and psychiatric and neurological conditions that alter memory, and including Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, autism, anxiety, and depression. And I don't think for one moment that, as bad as the Alzheimer's epidemic is, that we can overlook for 1 second children in the autism spectrum. I mean, you cannot turn around anywhere these days without hearing that word, autism spectrum. And
1 in 66 are what the numbers are being spoken about today. Number of children that are being born somewhere on that spectrum.
And that's an enormous amount, and we can't figure out a reason why, but hopefully people like Scripps and Scripps down here in Florida, who you and I have been to see, and all of these research organizations are toiling relentlessly.
And if I may just add, David, for our listeners, need to be aware that much of the federal funding for this basic research has been cut, and it's the MRCs of the world that are helping to support this research through their charitable and philanthropic projects. They're the ones that are making the difference. They're basically self-funding this research, and it's so important for those of you that are either personally dealing with these illnesses or see it as something that you want to personally embrace. MRC is a wonderful place to get involved by contributing dollars to help help fund the basic research.
Right, and you can make it specific to the disease
Yes.
that you would like to, support, as well as to MRC itself, which helps them go in and enables them to be able to solicit the federal employees. But obviously with cutbacks and programs shutting down within the federal government, those contributions are not as generous as they have been in the past. So it's real important for us as the public to get behind these efforts. It's not just to be shouldered by federal employees.
And we have elections coming up this year, and people should make their feelings be known as it comes to getting these programs refunded, because if that research isn't done, these medicines, if they come at all, are going to take much longer to come down the pike.
You're absolutely right. I see that we're getting ready for a station break. You're listening to us on WWNN 1470 AM, CareGiverReality.com, iHeartRadio, and AMP2 TV. And we'll be back right after the break, and we've got some very interesting information to bring you about hidden heroes.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse or loved one who can no longer take care of himself or herself? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Do you feel burned out, frustrated, and just don't know where to turn? You've tried doctors, lawyers, and mental health professionals and have come to realize that they don't have practical answers to these questions. What you need are experts, non-clinical family caregivers with 25 years of active experience helping thousands of family caregivers like yourself. People who can help you provide a better quality of life for yourself and your loved one. Who you need are David Levy or Paul Vadiato. Reach David at caregiverreality.com or reach Paul at caregiverreality.com and let them help you pick the right path towards improving the quality of life for you, the caregiver, and your loved one.
Today, so many different companies are offering varied views and choices to a healthier life, but few companies offer healthier choices, healthy tips, and multiple choices under one roof. Presenting Regents Park of Boca Raton's first Health and Wellness Expo on Saturday, May 17th. From 10 a.m. till 2 p.m., Regents Park of Boca Raton will have the medical community in-house to educate and inform the public on many needed services, such as blood pressure screenings, Healthy Touch Reiki, and much, much more. Regents is located at 6363 Verde Trail in Boca Raton, Florida 33433, and it's free to the public. Delicious food samplings will be featured, and healthy tips for better living will be offered. Valet parking will be available too. For more information, call 561-483-9282 or visit their website at www.regentsparkofbocaraton.com. Follow them on Facebook or YouTube and mark it on your calendar. May 17th at 10 a.m. at Regents Park of Boca Raton. Let them help get you on the path to better living.
This is Caregiver Reality with gerontologist David Levy and caregiver expert Paul Vadiato, who ask you to call in and speak with him on the air toll-free at 888-565-1470. That's 888-565-1470 to share a story or important information. Now, back to today's Caregiver Reality Show.
Very relaxed.
And we're back, and I just want to remind folks that that ad you heard for Regents Park Nursing Home on May 17th, I will be there with my book, the one that won the Florida Council on Aging Award. I'll be happy to inscribe it for you and be a part of what is going to be quite an event on the 17th. A lot of people, a lot of vendors, a lot of very interesting things to see and learn. Freddie, my producer, will be there. We'll be filming. We'll be doing interviews. And it's a great way to see what's going on out there, especially in the nursing home world. I know it very well because I live in the community that adjoins it. My dad was there. I have put many clients into that facility, and I will tell you, as a nursing home, they do a wonderful job, and kudos to them. And they've been doing it for a long time. They've been out there literally since that side of St. Andrews Boulevard got developed. So we'll see you on the 17th and look forward to it. By the way, if you're interested in taking a look at the book, it's on Kindle, and I decided to go on and talk and figure out exactly the simplest way to get to it. So if you get on Kindle, simply go to David Levy Caregiving, and it'll pop right up. I think it was #1 on one list and #2 on the other. I don't mean in terms of overall rating. I don't think that I can beat out Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll when it comes to those kind of books. But if you're looking for something that's informative, easy to use, and really explains what it takes to be an effective caregiver, not how I took care of mom and dad, not list after list, but what do I have to think about? What is it that I have to consider? What's going on out there that I need to know, because it's not instinctive. And if I don't understand it, it's no different than when you just said, Paul, if you want to be a great advocate, you don't necessarily just have an advocacy gene, all right? You got to understand what it takes to be an advocate. That part of what's in that book, in being a good caregiver, rubs off in being a good advocate.
Correct.
And so there's a lot there. It helps you think through things that you may have to do, things that you haven't done, and it helps you lay out a plan. And just like you said, 30, 60, 90 days, things could go upside down, but at least you know what your options are. And as I continuously say, and you repeat for me, and I thank you very much, if you know what your options are, even if they're not great ones, you have the understanding that you did the best you could with what you had in front of you at the time you had to do it. And caregiving is a continuous process of decision making. And so it's not one decision to make. It's not just, for argument's sake, do I put somebody in an assisted living facility? After they're there, what then? What are my responsibilities? What can I expect from the facility? What can't I expect? Who's going to manage my expectations? What's out there? What isn't? I never bought one. How do I look? What do I do? And just because somebody comes along and says, I can guide you there, you got to be careful who you're using. You need to understand that while you don't understand it, there are a lot of people out there, and I'm not saying that they're unscrupulous or anything like that, but remember, there are a lot of brokers in this world for a lot of health care. And even though you may not recognize it, that not so much in nursing homes, because that's Medicare, and it's pretty hard to collect a fee for putting somebody into Medicare, into a nursing home rather. But assisted living, other kinds of facilities, etc., have people that are knowledgeable, but recognize they have to earn a living too, and they do. And so just be aware that if you understand, it's no different than buying a house. You got to decide what it is you want, and then let somebody show you everything in the neighborhood. And while you're looking in the neighborhood, and whether it's an assisted living facility, how far away is the hospital? Where are the EMTs? You know, it's like looking, how close is the school? Where's the playground? There's a whole host of things that you have to know and consider, not just because they had a nice coat of paint on the outside, or when you walk through the door, there was a big fuzzy picture that said, we'll take care of mom. You need to understand how they're going to take care of mom, and then you need to understand how you're going to make sure that they take care of mom the right way. So understand that practical problem solving and caregiving is not intuitive. As we say all the time, we don't have a caregiver gene, and the best intentions, even if they arise out of love and very strong family ties, doesn't give you the capability to necessarily guide the ship through a long episode of caregiving or even a short acute one. Paul?
Yeah, one of the things that I learned in caregiving with my bride and dealing with lupus is that...
Is he your younger son?
it's you don't know what you don't know.
Right, and you can't be criticized for it, but you better recognize that you don't know and get some guidance.
And that's the beauty of the book. And you call it a book or a manual. To me, it's a toolbox.
Okay.
And it really gives me somewhere to go when I'm really struggling what to do. And I know there's a lot of references that are made here on the show to Alzheimer's and dementia, which is really one of the more difficult caregivers.
At least in this area, yes, and anywhere that you encounter it.
But it could be anything. It could be a stroke, it could be a heart attack, it could be a diagnosis of cancer, it could be a knee replacement. When you're a caregiver, it doesn't discriminate.
Right.
Issues are going to pop up that are going to require the caregiver to make decisions, and how you go about making those decisions and having a good feeling that you did the right thing is so important when we're dealing with a loved one, and that's the beauty of the book.
Right. Well, one of the things when I speak, and I don't use PowerPoint anymore since it's passé, but I occasionally use a poster that shows a big old Sears toolbox with a lot of standard tools in it. All right, and above it, what I have is a different set of handmade tools that old furniture makers used to use, because caregiving doesn't work with just a standard wrench. You have to adapt and create and craft some of those tools that you need from the standard ones. Not every screwdriver fits every situation, so you have to understand how to modify yours to fit what you're doing. But if you understand where you're starting out from and what your issues are, then it makes the modification process, or where to look or who to ask, a lot easier.
Just one little expansion on this. Our producer Freddie tells us that we have listeners all the way up in Alaska. As this program is streamed literally worldwide, not everyone is going to have the same resources as you get away from the metropolitan areas that that we're blessed to have here. So the tools that might be available to you might be different, but the problems are going to be similar. The solutions are going to need to be more creative, and how to go about making the choices for those decisions are how this book might really assist you.
Absolutely, because if you're living in Nome, you may have to put somebody in an assisted igloo. And sorry, Paul, but I mean, the point is, everything everything has to adapt to the environment. All right, and I won't make a walrus joke now. But what I did want to point out, I mentioned Hidden Heroes.
Yes.
And the last couple weeks, the RAND Corporation, which is the big investigative think tank, and we mentioned this over the last couple of weeks, came out with an incredible report called Hidden Heroes, which is all about the upwards of 5.5 million caregivers for people in the military, of which more than 1.2 million are post 9/11. And they did an incredible amount of research. They went back to every resource that it was possible to find on the internet, by searching, by consulting with others, and they did an incredible effort and put it together. First of all, it's under RAND Hidden Heroes if you just put it on your search engine, and while it's a big document, there is a summary that will kind of bring things into focus very clearly. Mm-hmm. And just as the military, and one of the things that they had to do, because it was hard to find a lot of caregiver information from the military, there was a lot of clinical information, about the patient, because certainly the military knows who's in, who's out, what's on the VA system, and a lot of other things, and who's been at what hospital. But very rarely do they consider and dial in what's happening with the wife or husband of that returning wounded warrior.
Who is really on the scene, they boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground along with their kids. Boy, you talk about being sandwich generation. I'm not talking about those family members that are still necessarily taking care of a World War II veteran, of which we're slowly losing an awful lot of them. But I'm talking about somebody that served in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and is suffering from PTSD, had a limb blown off, and who is relying upon the family, because there's only so much that the VA can do for them clinically. How do they go about getting their lives back together again? How do they stop jumping every time a car backfires and they think it's incoming fire? There's a tremendous amount of need inside of the VA system for caregiving, and I think that the RAND study has really highlighted some of the incredible needs of caregiving, and I think it analogizes to the problems that we see here in the United States and worldwide. Is there are not a lot of in-depth resources. There are places, there are things, there's stuff, all right, but the ability to cope, the ability to understand, the ability to recognize, just as parents that have kids with autism, all right, and I know we keep coming back to it, or a special needs child with a birth defect, realize at a certain point in time that they're more than just mom and dad, that they could be chronic caregivers for the rest of their lives or for a major portion of it. And that takes an entirely different mindset. This isn't a short-term event. And when you have somebody that's come home that's been in the war, that gets up at night screaming, as well as the fact that they've got to put on a prosthesis, leg, arm, whatever it may be, you have some pretty extensive needs that go well beyond just what the VA and the clinical system can do for you. And it takes an understanding and a compassionate family, spouse, children, who also, wife has to earn a living. Disability pay isn't going to do it. Kids have to go to school and want a soccer mom or a soccer dad, and that isn't so easy to do if dad's in a wheelchair. I'm not saying that they can't, and they put out a tremendous amount of effort, but they certainly need help, and that caregiver needs help. And I think that the RAND Hidden Heroes focus has really, and I've been watching the amount of citations or references that are coming off the internet to various blogs, publications, etc., that have been citing this study as part of information that they're giving out, and it's well in excess now of over 1,000, and this is in a 10-day period of time. So if you haven't seen it, you should. If you're a caregiver, it will give you a much better idea of what is and what isn't out there. And
you know, David, as I was looking at the summary, it's almost as if these folks are hiding in plain sight. We see them, but we really don't understand beyond the patient the stresses that are on the family, the extended family, and the struggles that they have on a day-to-day basis. And you know, we see the bumper stickers on the car, we support our troops. Well, that's one of the things that this RAND report looks at, is how do you go about doing that?
Right. And you know, and at least since 9/11,
yes,
we have a much greater respect for that. There's a whole generation that grew up when I was in college and high school that went off to Vietnam, and it was an unpopular war, and when people came back, they were spit at. People turned their back. It's not like today when you see somebody wearing a uniform that walks into an airport, people literally stand up and clap for them. Well, when they came back from Vietnam, there was none of that, because it was an unpopular war at a time when this country was growing up in a very different kind of a way. And they've been not just hidden heroes, they're forgotten heroes. And those are the folks, unfortunately, some got their lives back together again, but many of them are living in those camps on the side of the road that I allude to. You know, I say it in a manner to make it clear, but so many of them are homeless. So many of them are just at the marginal edge of what's going on. Many of them have not only PTSD, but other issues. Many of them came back from the jungles of Vietnam addicted, or became addicted afterwards because they couldn't live with what was in their head. And we have a responsibility to them as well. These are people that served our country. They may have been drafted as opposed to volunteers, because that's what we had to do at that time. But nonetheless, they served their country whether the war was popular or not. And I don't think that we can turn our back on them now, even though we did then, at a time of even greater need. If you'd like to comment on that, we're at 1-888-565-1470. You're listening to us on WWNN 1470 AM and on the CareGiverReality.com. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll be back. And Paul and I have some things to tell you that are going to be coming up in the near future, and some of the other things that we're doing. So we'll go to a break.
Today, so many different companies are offering varied views and choices to a healthier life, but few companies offer healthier choices, healthy tips, and multiple choices under one roof. Presenting Regents Park of Boca Raton's first Health and Wellness Expo on Saturday, May 17th. From 10 a.m. till 2 p.m., Regents Park of Boca Raton will have the medical community in-house to educate and inform the public on many needed services, such as blood pressure screenings, Healthy Touch Reiki, and much, much more. Regents is located at 6363 Verde Trail in Boca Raton, Florida, 33433, and it's free to the public. Delicious food samplings will be featured, and healthy tips for better living will be offered. Valet parking will be available too. For more information, call 561-483-9282 or visit their website at www.regentsparkofbocaraton.com. Follow them on Facebook or YouTube and mark it on your calendar. May 17th at 10 a.m. at Regents Park of Boca Raton. Let them help get you on the path to better living.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse or loved one who can no longer take care of himself or herself? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Do you feel burned out, frustrated, and just don't know where to turn? You've tried doctors, lawyers, and mental health professionals and have come to realize that they don't have practical answers to these questions. What you need are experts, non-clinical family caregivers with 25 years of active experience helping thousands of family caregivers like yourself. People who can help you provide a better quality of life for yourself and your loved one. Who you need are David Levy or Paul Vadiato. Reach David at david@caregiverreality.com or reach Paul at caregiverreality.com and let them help you pick the right path towards improving the quality of life for you, the caregiver, and your loved one. This is Caregiver Reality with gerontologist David Levy and caregiver expert Paul Vadiato, who ask you to call in and speak with him on the air toll-free at 888-565-1470. That's 888-565-1470 to share a story or important information. Now, back to today's Caregiver Reality Show.
Well, we're back, and while we took a break, our producer and Paul had a very interesting short conversation. Paul, why don't you kind of capsulize what you guys were talking about?
Freddie makes a very good point, and sometimes we tend to think that caregivers are a homogeneous group. All caregivers are alike, and sometimes we neglect to recognize that there are cultural differences, there are ethnic differences, geographical, religious differences, and as you go to these various areas or regions, caregiving is going to look entirely different, and I think we have to be cognizant of that as not only we talk about caregiving from the military perspective, but also from our loved ones.
Well, you know, one of the things I've discussed with Freddie, who's been a caregiver for his parents, and I don't think I'm telling tales out of school, but in the Latino population, there isn't really a word for caregiver. It's either daughter or son, or as Freddie says, it's the television set. And but you know, while that may quickly be humorous, it's very true. And in this day and age of chronic diseases and Alzheimer's and a lot of these debilitating but long-lasting illnesses, to be put into service, so to speak, as a caregiver, because you feel that culturally it's a family responsibility, and it very well may be, but you're in the role now, and just because it's family tradition doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to do it any better than anyone else who's in that caregiver role that doesn't understand what their options and alternatives are. And you and I both know that I've been working with the Caribbean Coalition to try and educate caregivers down in the Caribbean, and it's been a little bit of a slow start, not necessarily because I don't want to do it, but we ran into a bunch of cultural highlights, you know, just like Cinco de Mayo is coming up, and so not that I'm talking necessarily about Mexico, but I think that we all have to recognize that every culture brings with it its norms and differences, and the fact that we can't identify, and also the other thing, the word caregiver, unless you really define it, and I find a lot of people call themselves caretakers, and you know, I make light of that because a caretaker to me is somebody that mows the lawn at a cemetery, but caregivers don't recognize themselves, and it's a word. If you're a doctor, you're a caregiver. If you're a nurse, you're a caregiver. If you're a social worker, you could be a caregiver. And so understanding the difference for a family caregiver and one that we call an informal family caregiver, because they're not even being paid for the job, notwithstanding the fact that at 10 or 12 bucks an hour, if we had to pay them, it'd be over $500 billion today. But we have to recognize the differences. Just as you mentioned, you might live in an area that doesn't have the resources that we have down here. Down here we have too many resources at times, and we don't know how to select between them, or what's good and what's bad. The same thing goes with people's cultural norms and values and how they were raised. There was a kinder and gentler time in this country when we were an agrarian, a farm society, and if dad or mom or grandpa got sick, they sat on the porch in the rocking chair. The grandchildren kept an eye on them. Everyone went out in the field, did what they had to do, and that was essentially caregiving in the 18th century or early 19th century. We don't have that any longer. All right, we don't have even family that live close to one another. So being asked to be a family caregiver and having to do it long distance, and I talked a little bit about it just because of what I'm involved with between here and Pennsylvania now that my aunt is still alive. But when I talk with Freddie and his parents are down in Puerto Rico, you know, that's long distance caregiving as well as a huge cultural gap. And I think going forward that we're going to have folks on of different cultural persuasions, so to speak, and let them define a little bit more for our audience and for those that are of the same culture, ethnicity, religion, etc. What caregiving means to them, how they define it, and how they would approach it, and see whether it's really any different when you don't know, as you said earlier, what you don't know.
And even looking at it closer, put it under a higher intensity of the microscope, within the Latino community, you're going to have many subsets, different traditions, different cultures, different ways that they go about doing their caregiving.
Well, even amongst white Anglo-Saxons,
they're all fingerprints.
They're all fingerprints. Yeah. So why would it be any different with any other culture, except that they've almost predetermined to some degree by culture who should be the caregiver? And so therein lies a couple of the differences, but it doesn't make the job any easier. Yes, it's done out of love, respect, concern, and caring, but nothing flies into your head that says, how do I deal with this kind of a situation? What do I do if I'm confronted with this, that, or the other thing? You know, you're listening to us on WWNN 1470 AM on Drive Time Radio. We hope that you're enjoying the show. One of the things, and Paul and I were discussing it, even though we say call in, what we found, and an attorney called me today who's going to be on the show in the next couple of weeks, who listens, and he says, I find it fascinating. I said, well, you've never called in? He said, that's because I wouldn't want to interrupt you. You guys have so much to say that it's hard to want to, you know, break your train of thought. But he's involved right now in some appellate litigation.
What does that mean, David?
Well, in other words, it's up on the appeals level that has to do with family responsibility towards paying when you're in a facility.
Okay.
And this is going to be an area of great concern going forward, and he's going to be on. I think we actually have a caller. So go ahead, caller.
Yes, I am trying to find out how would I go about helping somebody who is 81, don't have immediate help. Actually, she don't have nobody to help. She's alone all the time, and I'm a working person. So when I do get a break, I jump in to help.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for doing that. All right. You didn't have to, but you do it out of the kindness of your heart and the concern that you have for that individual. Now, there are resources that can at least give you some idea of what is available. If you call the Elder Hotline, the 211 number that's available here in Palm Beach and Broward County, and you indicate to them what is going on with this woman, if she needs transportation, if she possibly needs a visiting nurse, if she needs other kinds of services that we do have available in the community, that's an excellent place to start. At 81,
Elderly hotline.
That's not easy. Is she able to get around?
That's the problem. No, she has stiff legs, always in pain, sciatic back problem, and she fell just 2 days ago.
All right. Well, when she fell, when she fell, did someone call 911 for her?
No. She said she didn't hurt herself or anything like that.
Well, let me tell you something. I have a very good friend of mine who's 57 years old and slipped off a ladder on Sunday. It was only a step ladder, and he landed on his butt. And he's not 81 by any means, and he waited until yesterday to go to the hospital, and he had a fractured hip. Do not assume because she doesn't feel anything. And it's not too late to call 911 and at least let the professionals come in the front door and assess her.
Is there family?
But you indicated that there's nobody else around. There's no family around?
And nobody's around. But what is the problem? The first time she fell, she called the ambulance. They took her to the emergency room. She was upset that they didn't even do an x-ray. They monitor her, check her out, and send her back home.
Well, I don't know, and I don't want to know who the facility is because let's not cast aspersions.
Right.
But since this was her second fall, I think that we need to indicate that she probably should be checked out by a professional and let them take her to the hospital. And if you can possibly go and be her advocate and say, she's fallen a number of times, she needs to get an x-ray, especially when you talk about sciatica, arthritis, and the frailty that can come about at age 81. But going forward, do you live in Palm Beach or Broward County?
In Broward.
Okay. Well, there are transportation services. There's the Area Agency on Aging, which you can reach. There's an Easy Broward number. I don't have it in front of me.
Yes.
Where they can come out. You can have. Does she have any funds, or is this? Would she be a Medicaid patient?
She is a Medicaid patient.
All right. Well, then Medicaid will provide certain services,
no,
and
she's having problems with that because how they are structured is she has to be able to make it downstairs on her own. They won't come for her and in a wheelchair because they are not supposed to lift the wheelchair. She has to,
all right. Well,
bring herself downstairs.
These are special circumstances, and I recognize that that they can't necessarily pick that wheelchair up, and that says to me even more that you need to make sure that you call 911 because they will get her downstairs. Now, not on obviously on an everyday basis, but there are ways around being able to handle people who are a little more inaccessible. Yeah. And Medicaid, even though they can't pick up her wheelchair and take her down, have other ways of making that happen because there are plenty of people living here in South Florida in 2- and 3-story buildings that do not have an elevator that are situated in the same kind of a predicament. So the first step I would tell you is call 911. Let them make sure that she goes to the hospital, gets an x-ray, has an opportunity for them to check them out. Call 211, speak to the elder care hotline, and at least see what additional resources are available, and then call the number that she has on her Medicaid card for whoever is the local provider that's responsible for taking care of her. You explain the situation, and if you do not get a reasonable answer, write down this number.
Okay.
561-482-0086. That's my office number. You call me, and I will help you with this.
Is this Dave?
Excuse me?
Are you Dave?
Yes, I'm David. All right.
Okay,
so
indicate all this and then call the ambulance.
Okay. And please do that because she deserves the opportunity to be seen and properly taken care of. Anyway, caller, thank you very much. We're at the end of the show. You have my number.
Yes,
please feel free to use it. And you're listening to the Caregiver Reality Hour. We're winding down. Thank you very much from the caller. Those are not easy situations. It's hard to prescribe everything that we would like to do in that short a period of time, but we're here to help. Paul?
Everyone, have a great week. Be an advocate for the ones that you love, and we'll see you next week, same time.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, South Florida, America, and the world, and thanks the caller for taking the time to care about somebody else.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Reality Show. Each week, David Levy, a gerontologist, and Paul Vadiato, a caregiver expert with a combined over 25 years of experience, providing practical and realistic help to caregivers struggling to keep up with the needs of a loved one who are unable to care for himself or herself. To reach David Levy, email him at david@caregiverreality.com. Or to reach Paul Vadiato, email paul@caregiverreality.com. And find out more online. Just go to caregiverreality.com. See you next week for another exciting show of Caregiver Reality.